Hello, hello. Hello, hello.
Hey,
Hello, how's it going?
pretty good. I just messaged him like, am I in the right place?
Oh my goodness. Listen, it doesn't matter how many times I practice. It's like totally fine an hour before, a day before. Like the moment it starts, Zoom is like, no, 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 no. Don't want to act right. Hi, Ashley. How are you?
Hey, sorry, I'm at work. I went upstairs where we have like extra room and so nobody's around.
Oh, no worries. How are you?
Doing good. It's been a day, but I'm good.
Oh, well, hopefully it gets better from here. I've been there before, so I know how you feel. Hey, Cole, I looks like you're connecting the audio.
Yep, I just did.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Happy Sunday, everybody.
Happy Sunday.
It's Sunday.
Woohoo, woohoo. Perfect. So Ehsaneh is going to join us at 2:00, but I figured we could start off with just, this is an opportunity to just say what you think, get it all out there. Don't feel like you have to be like censored or anything. So maybe we just start off like we did the last time, which is what did everybody think of the book? Like if you had to give it between 1 and 5 stars, how many stars? And while you guys are talking, I'm gonna close this because there's a huge glare here. How many stars would you guys give? Cole, because you're first from my screen, I'm gonna ask you to go first.
I knew that was going to happen. I actually am a horrible person and I started it, but didn't finish it.
No worries, because we're gonna get you so up to speed. So no worries.
I started Pride Month and I lost track of like all of my mental bearings about buddy reads. And then I went on vacation and I was like, oh, I'll read it on vacation. And then I forgot it. So that's my life.
Well, I saw the pictures. It looks like you had a great time.
I did. It was a blast. It ended way too quick.
Oh, good. How long were you there for?
Just a week, Monday through Friday.
Doesn't it feel so short though?
It does. It does. I blinked and we were on the way home.
Oh, okay. So let me do this for some other folks who maybe didn't get through the whole book. I'm going to do like the huge like overview to the extent that's helpful for some people in case you forgot some stuff. Like me, if I don't write it down or make a note or something, I'm like, really? That person, he died or that happened? So we start off with the marriage of Sarah and Ali in Tehran. They are like this young couple. It was started out as an arranged marriage. And first Sarah was like, I don't really want to do this. And then she sort of met Ali and they kind of hit it off and like, absolutely, we want to do this. The big issue here is that their families are from different political, they have different political affiliations. And so, hello, Hazel, this is actually my mother. Hey.
Oh, hi, Mom.
Can you hear us? I hear nothing.
I'll
wait for a second. Sometimes it takes a second for the audio to join. And I know she didn't finish all of hers either, so this will be good for her as well. So they're from they have two different sort of political affiliations, and they're both their families are sort of hardcore, where Sarah and Ali are just like, whatever, we just love each other. It doesn't really matter. We're just gonna, kind of do our thing. So there's disruptions at the wedding, but the wedding moves forward. They get married. They are on their way to their honeymoon when they get stopped. There are protests in the streets and stuff happens, but eventually Ali, her husband, gets arrested by the voluntary militia. She doesn't know why, doesn't know how, but he gets arrested. He's taken off to jail. And it sort of ends there. Well, it doesn't end there. There's a ton of different family members. And if you saw the list of characters in like the beginning of the book, this is like golden, because I kept forgetting who was who, and I got people confused, and I was like, wait a minute, was that like, it didn't make sense. So I referred back to this family tree here a lot. But any event, Marie, I think that's how you pronounce her name. She's sort of the matriarch of one of the families, and so she sort of tells folks what they need to do and how things should be run. And so essentially, the families try to keep them separate from each other. And they are successful in that for some time, but then Ali gets out of jail and they kind of secretly reunite and start continuing their relationship. Sarah eventually gets pregnant, and as they go to tell their parents, there's a big brouhaha about that. And I'm trying to think the best way to sort of sum it all up. I mean, I think there's a sister-in-law who ends up in jail and tortured, and there at the very end of the scene, there's this big torture scene where she is sort of handcuffed and she's being interrogated, and the torturer like rips her son's ear off. He lives. And then there's another wedding at the end with two of the other characters. So that's a huge high level. But I think it gives a little bit of flavor as to sort of where we started versus kind of where we ended up in the book. So hopefully that's helpful. Kenya, you want to give your star rating for this month's read?
Sure, I didn't read it. I did read your summaries for each of the discussion blocks, so that was really helpful.
Okay, good. Happy to hear that. No worries. Like I said, we're here to just chat about it regardless. Ashley, you are up next. What rating did you give the book?
I gave it a solid 4.
Okay.
Like obviously some parts were hard to get through. Really, I think it deserves like a 4.5, honestly. It was just a lot. There was so much packed in, how many pages is this?
It's like just over 3, I think.
It's like right under 300 pages. There's so much in that happened, and
what's the time span of time? I think there's a couple of months in between him getting arrested and then getting back together, right? But how fast is the story supposed to be taking place?
I think it was like 3 months between when he got arrested and then they finally got like reunited.
So I thought it was 2 weeks.
Oh, so was it? Oh, maybe it was.
So I'm pretty sure. So I listened to all of it. So I had to get the audio because like I work all the time. And since I groom dogs, I can listen while I'm grooming. So I listened to all of it. What was it, the day before yesterday? And I think it was 2 weeks. And somebody told her that that he was out, and she like ran into him like outside of a restaurant. She was like, "Oh, I can't believe I had to hear from somebody else that you've been out for 2 weeks," or something like that. I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was weird because they neither of them reached out to the other person to like say, "Hey, you're my spouse. Like, what's going on?" Their family sort of got in their ears, and so neither of them reached out, and then they just kind of bumped into each other at a cafe, and it just I don't know, it was a little strange, and they both were like, "Well, why didn't you call me?" And the other said, "Well, why didn't you call me? You've been out of jail for a while." And it was sort of like some of it I thought maybe it was like just due to them being young and naive, like, well, listen, guys, like you can't, both of you guys have a responsibility to kind of take the next step to work things out. So okay, did you have sort of a favorite, I don't know, takeaway from the book, like kind of overall, like your idea of like what kind of themes were running through it, or did you learn anything from it?
That's always hard for me to say. Like I feel like I'm not a super critical reader, but I did get like super emotional like throughout the whole thing because like this kind of stuff like really happened, and it's just the extremist side of things can make a culture as a whole look bad, unfortunately. I have people from India and Pakistan in my family, so I've heard a lot of stuff from them as well. And like that's basically the biggest takeaway is like that's not the whole of a community or identity or anything. Like there's different levels to everything. It's not just like you see the bad stuff like through media and everything, but that doesn't represent everybody and everything. So I don't know.
Okay, thank you for that. Hazel, Mom. I know you didn't get a chance to get through all of it, but did you have thoughts on just the book overall?
I actually loved it. I'm actually learning something from it, something about another culture per se, but I did not get the opportunity to finish the book. But the beginning of it was really, really very interesting as far as how they actually go out and choose their spouses. I found that very interesting. I know I'm in the beginning of this, guys, where I'm talking about the spouse. And just, I think it's going to be a great book. And I've read all of your information that you put out there. So I really and truly think it's a good book. I did want to get to the end of it, but it seems like you guys are helping me to get to the end of it just by listening.
I have done that many times. So I'm very familiar with how that works.
I'm super excited for when the author comes on.
Yeah, I think it should be good. I think that one thing I thought was really interesting about this is just the timing of it. And so we know here in the US, there was, before the last presidential election, there were people who were for one candidate and people were for another candidate. And it was interesting because I know I would like pass by like yard signs and they'd have both Trump and Biden yard signs. I'm like, man, in one household, I wonder what that household must be like. And so this book was, what I thought was funny about it is it sort of mirrored some of that, where you had family members who had very completely conflicting views of, from a political standpoint, and just how all that fleshed out, right? And how they interacted with each other, whether or not they were able to change, their minds. There were some characters that I felt like, there were some characters who sort of started listening a little bit more, learning a little bit more, and had the opportunity to sort of step back and say, okay, wait a minute. Maybe I don't know as much about this candidate or this political stand that I thought I did. And just sort of being open to learning, right? Learning more, growing more, and potentially, changing, or even if not changing necessarily, because I don't think necessarily the goal. I think it's just to open yourself up to different perspectives and say, okay, well, this person thinks this, or they follow this particular candidate or political view. And so I can understand where they're coming from. I may or may not agree. Kenya, looks like you were saying something.
Yeah, I'm curious because I didn't read the book.
No worries.
So I'm curious if, because it sounded like you said it started off the idea with the arranged marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious about this idea that there was an arrangement between two groups of people who didn't agree with each other. Because my understanding of arranged marriages isn't that you go out and find somebody who's completely different from you.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that would even sort of like the families would be fighting at the wedding because they would have gone through all of that already. And they would have had to agree that the marriage was going to take place. So to be at the wedding and say, oh, you need to call the wedding off feels very Western, whereas the premise of the wedding doesn't sound as Western.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand. I don't know if Ashley, if you understood. For me, I didn't feel like the author went into a ton of detail about it. It was their marriage had been arranged because they were well-to-do families and it made sense, and then I don't know if it was like, then they realized that their political views were so different. And then they said, no, this isn't a good fit. But at that point, Ali and Sarah were already together. That's what I took from it. I didn't feel like there was a whole bunch of explanation other than it was arranged, but then it was the families called it off. But then the two, Sarah and Ali were like, no, we want to do this. We're sort of into this. So Ashley, I don't know if you got something different, but that's kind of what I got from it.
No, that was about the same. It was like the head of the household. I'm not sure how you say her name. I just listened to the book and I heard her name a million times and I can't say it. But yeah, she wanted to have the whole thing called off. And there was other conflicts, but they had already been talking and kind of fell for each other. So
yeah, that's what I thought too. It just sort of ended. It kind of just ended up that way. I'm curious of kind of what you thought of the ending with like the torture scene and the ear being chopped off, like, I don't know. I'm curious as to what you thought, if that came out of left field for you, or kind of what you thought about the ending of it.
I don't know, it's hard. So I kind of saw it coming because obviously you can kind of tell there's this really evil behind. I don't even know how you say his name.
I think is it the Haydari?
Haydari, yeah.
I feel like I'm butchering all the names. Like I
Me too.
don't feel like any of them are right.
But yeah, I mean, I kind of thought that we were gonna come to a head with something like that. I didn't expect it to be the characters that, it happened to. Because there was a lot of information in that last little bit with the medical records and everything, and them trying to, it was kind of crazy. I was really upset that they brought the little kid into it. That's what surprised me, honestly. I knew something was going to happen, but the child part, that got me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did think that was that part was unexpected to me. And just so everybody knows, the child does live. I think he just ends up having like a deformed ear or something. But the way the scene, that particular, I think that's the end of that particular scene. It just sort of ends and you're like, oh gosh, like what has happened here? So the kid ends up being fine, just sort of, I think his ear maybe he had surgery or something to sort of fix his ear. But I also thought that was, I don't know, I wasn't sort of expecting that. So it came a little bit out of left field for me. But I think you're right. I think at some point we sort of understand that something's got to happen. And just for the other folks, so Ali's sister, Azar, she is a divorce attorney, and she sort of is a little bit of an anomaly, I think, in many respects, as far as the fact that she's a woman, but she's doing this job of like helping women specifically to get out of divorce, get out of marriages that are oppressive or abusive, or they've been forced into for whatever reason. And so she really kind of does this a little, there are not many folks who are doing this, right? And so she is definitely an outsider in that respect. She considers herself an activist, and she sort of goes, you see a lot of times throughout the book where she's taken sort of risks in the hopes of exposing this voluntary militia and sort of all the bad things that they're doing. And, there are times where she risks her family, as we've sort of talked about, and some other things, but she feels, very steadfast in it. And as Ashley was talking about kind of medical records, she had taken medical records, kind of stolen them. I think they were, stolen records to sort of show, kind of expose them, right? To sort of tell it to the newspaper, to say, hey, this is what you think is happening behind the scenes isn't really happening. So I did think her character was interesting. Ashley, I'm interested in what you thought about Azar, like whether you thought she was, I don't know, whether you could relate to her, or do you just thought she just made bad decisions, or your feedback on her?
So I kind of feel like in that situation, it's kind of makes you wonder what you would do, like if you had the opportunity to try to incite this change, and try to make life safer. Because I feel like that was her goal. She wants life to be safer for her, her children, because of the extremist side of things, that, the majority of people don't see, and that, is trying to be covered up. But yeah, I thought that she was very interesting. I think she might have been my favorite character for sure.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did find her interesting as well. I just, I think she was complex too, which I really liked. There were some parts of her that I thought like, oh, that makes total sense, and other parts where I was like, maybe not the best way to go about some of these things. But I think that's what kind of makes it fun to sort of read through. One thing that happened in this book is they jumped, right? You got to see different perspectives. So we started off with Sarah's perspective, and then we jumped to each one of the characters. I don't think all the characters got a chapter or chapters where we got to see their viewpoint, but there was some jumping around, so we could kind of see different scenarios from the perspectives of the different, people who were living in it. I'm curious as to how you, like, was that easy to follow, or did you think it was a bit choppy when it was kind of jumping kind of back and forth?
So with the audio, it was a little bit harder because it wasn't like super like defined, I guess. I don't know how to word it. But I mean, it did fall into I fell into a good pace with it because I did listen to pretty much it all, all the way through. So it wasn't too bad. Yeah.
Okay. I'm curious, for the audio, did it have different narrators for each of the characters, or was it all like the same person?
It was the same person. I would have to double check. That's sad. I don't know.
But I think it's true, like, of a lot of audiobooks, if the audiobook, like, a good narrator, you forget that they're the same person. You know what I mean? Like, you start to follow along with the character rather than the narrator's voice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It looks like it was one narrator according to my Hoopla app.
I don't do audiobooks because I just can't. I can't for some reason. I just can't. But I would, that to me, I think for the way I would listen and hear it, it'd be difficult for me to keep up if it was like jumping from different perspectives, but it was always the same person. Like, even if the person, like, I don't know, changed their voice or something, I feel like if the narrator like changed their voice a little bit, I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes total sense. But otherwise, I think it'd be probably a little bit difficult to follow.
I think Harry Potter audiobooks are the best with one narrator, but he does like all the voices.
Yeah, like I feel
it's
like
really good. Yeah.
I feel like that's something that would be super helpful, right? Is to have that ability to to change like the narrators.
Yeah.
So there were a couple of deaths in the book, one of which was Miss Tabibian, who turned out to be oh wait, Ehsaneh is here. Give me 1 second so I can try to admit her. Hello, good afternoon. How are you? Can you hear me okay?
Hello, yes, I can hear you now. It just took a minute to connect to the audio.
Oh, no worries. I guess it is still morning for you.
Just barely. It's 11 o'clock, so.
Well, we appreciate you jumping on. We were just sort of talking a little bit about how some of the, we talked a little bit about we thought it was interesting between sort of the US presidential election and layering that over top of sort of the green wave protests and some of the things you talked about in your book. So we're chatting about some of those things, but we want to take a moment to just, again, thank you for joining us. And I will actually let you do your introduction because I always feel like the person themselves do a much better job than someone who like reads it from somewhere. So if you want to go ahead and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first, I just want to thank you so much for your interest in A Door Between Us and the opportunity to kind of connect with your readers. And just thank you for the work that you're doing to get more people excited about reading and exposed to a whole range of different stories. I'm really excited for your subscription service and really, wishing you the best of luck as that goes forward. And I'm excited to be on with all of you guys as well. I actually like to do like a little kind of icebreaker as by way of introduction. So what I'll say is I'm going to share a few things that are true about me. And what I'd love to do is if you can give me a thumbs up or whatever, just to let me know if that is true about you as well. And then that gives me a chance to kind of get to know you guys and gives you guys a chance to get to know me a little bit as well. Okay, so does anybody else live in California? I live in California. Just me.
No. Unfortunately, no.
Okay, all right. Let's see. Does anyone have kids?
Yeah.
Got kids? Okay, all right. Anybody with teenagers? You got teenagers? Okay, all right. I got 2 teenagers, a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old. 17-year-old now. What am I saying? Has anyone, okay, so we talked about California. Has anyone ever lived in the DC area or currently live in the DC area? Oh, okay. Are you in the DC area now, or you used to live there?
So I actually grew up in Fairfax.
Oh, okay.
And lived in Richmond, Virginia, which is not too far from DC, but I have a ton of family in and around the area. And so I am in and around DC quite a bit.
Okay. Yeah. I grew up in the Silver Spring area. So Maryland side instead.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So, okay. Fun. What about Salt Lake City? Anybody ever live in Salt Lake City? Nope. All right. Okay.
Is that Utah?
Utah, huh? Yeah. It's like, where is that crazy city?
Okay.
Yeah. All right. What about the Middle East? And I'll make it broader, and I'll even say not just living, but anyone visited the Middle East? Anywhere in the Middle East? No? Okay. All right. Does anybody have a brother? All right.
Yeah.
We got a few people with brothers. Yeah. Anybody have two brothers? Yeah. We got a few people with two brothers. 3 brothers. Oh, there we go. Okay. It's me and Kenya are still in there. Any 4 brothers, Kenya? You're tapping out of 3. Okay, I've got 5 brothers, so
Wow.
it's a lot. And actually, the only time I've done one of the book clubs where anybody else has had the same number or more brothers was with a group that was in Salt Lake. So they have a lot of kids, the Mormons. Is anybody on the call a bicyclist or likes to bicycle around a lot? No, that's just
No,
me.
but if I could tell you a quick thing, my bicycle has been sitting in my garage for 135 years, and I read that you bicycle, and I was just inspired. I got up this morning, the tire was flat, the seat need to be readjusted. I had to do the cobwebs had to be pulled off the bike, but I actually went and did it today because I was like, oh, this would be a fun way of getting in your headspace. So I don't do it regularly, but I did do it today.
Well, I'm so excited to hear that. If you were close by, I would offer to come over and help out, because a lot of times, bicycling, it sometimes can feel a little intimidating. I mean, we really, at the Bicycle Coalition, we want this to be not just something that we think of middle-aged men in spandex that are going super fast. No, we want grandmas and little kids and people to feel comfortable, because it's just a really fun way to incorporate exercise, and it's good for the environment. And so one of the things I love to do is just locally, I'll help friends figure out, oh yeah, let's figure out the seating on the bicycle. Because these little things, when you don't know it, it can feel kind of intimidating, or let's figure out how to put a rack on there. So, okay. Let's see. I think that's kind of where I will stop on that. So that's kind of fun way for me to get to know you guys a little bit. And then I think I'll go into the presentation. So I see it looks like I have the share screen. Okay, yeah. So I think you'll need to make me a co-host so I can share my screen. And while you're figuring that out, I'll just let you guys know, I am more than happy to answer questions as we go through. It's also fine if we just I go through the whole thing and then we talk afterwards. The presentation's about 10 minutes long, and about the first half is kind of more about me and my connection to Iran. And then the second half is about what was going on in Iran in 2009. So it gives a little more context for the book.
Yeah, that would be great. And for some folks didn't get a chance to finish the entire book, I thought that's one of the things that's done in the book is sort of different chapters are punctuated by actual events that were occurring. And I pulled out the Google and started saying, oh, I had no idea. So that would be really great, I think.
Yeah.
Did I make you a host? I think I did.
Let's see if I can do it now. Yes.
Okay.
I just need to figure out which. All right, you guys can see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. All right, so that up top is a picture of Tehran that was taken a few years back by my brother-in-law. And Tehran is kind of basically shaped you've got the mountains on all sides, and then you have the valley, although the valley is reaching up to the tops of the mountains, they keep building. But that gives you a really good sense of what Tehran kind of looks like. Sometimes the only thing that's a little different is sometimes it gets so polluted, especially in the winter, you have the inversion that it's so smoggy that you can't even see those mountains in the background. So this picture was taken after the day before it had rained. It was beautiful, it was clear. And my brother-in-law was took a picture and shared it. And I loved it so much that it's actually I have little bookmarks and I put this on my bookmark because I just love the picture. All right, so this is a picture of my parents there on the left, and they met as kind of young student activists when they were at UCLA, and politics was really a part of their lives from the very beginning. And that was a time when a lot of people were active in a lot of different types of things, whether it was Vietnam or Iran or whatever. And, you know, for them, one of the things they got really involved in, and, you know, my father being Iranian, was the student movement against the king who ruled Iran at the time, who was called the Shah, if you remember. So you see the sign there down with the Shah. And then my parents got married. And this is me making my appearance. And brother number one, looking very happy. And there's brother number two. And so even, you know, as kind of the family was growing, they still, you know, my father in particular was really in touch with what was going on in Iran. You know, it kind of got to a point for my father where he just felt like, you know, so many of his friends and brothers and cousins were really in Iran risking their lives because the kind of protest movements had become more and more heated. We're out in the streets protesting injustices associated with the Shah. And he just felt like, you know, I need to be a part of this. I want to be a part of making this happen as well. So shortly after that last picture was taken, they decided that my dad was going to go to Iran. So this was late 1978. And the hope was that things would like go well, and that we would join, you know, after things sort of settled down. And that's basically kind of what happened. When my dad got there, there was still a lot going on in the streets, but you know, the protests began, millions and millions and millions of people, to the point that the Shah actually did end up leaving. This is a picture of the day the Shah, that's the king, and his wife left the country. And then Khomeini arrived. And at the time, there was this sense that this is this incredibly wonderful, amazing spiritual leader. And this is like the person who is going to lead Iran into this new and democratic era. So there's this huge excitement about his return as well. And he had, you know, been exiled. He had criticized, you know, really led a lot of the resistance against the king. So there was a lot of excitement on his return. And then we did come back, and it was interesting. You know, I've talked to my mom about, you know, it's kind of crazy. Like, you know, you guys decide you've got 3 kids at this point, and your thought is, let's just go into the middle of a revolution, and, you know, dad's going to go first and leave you alone in the U.S. Like, you know, what, you know, how were you thinking this all through? And it was, you know, for her, she actually felt like she was totally on board, really felt excited about this as an opportunity to kind of build a country in this new image and this new hope. And the really kind of sad and heartbreaking thing is Khomeini, who so many people put their faith in, and this hope about this democratic experience and experiment really went awry. And by the time I was going into 3rd grade, so many of my parents' friends had either been arrested, some had been killed, some had fled the country. My father was imprisoned for a short time because really the revolution kind of turned on itself, and there were splinters within the different groups that were involved. So we ended up leaving Iran. And that is when we moved to Salt Lake. So this is, now you see the next brother. And then in this picture, we had moved to the DC area. So this is in Maryland. And this is also in the DC area. That's my grandma. And this is my final little brother. And during these years in Salt Lake and then in the DC area, it didn't feel safe to be going back to Iran. But by the time that last picture was taken, it felt like things had settled down. I had finished my undergraduate degree. I was kind of looking for a way to, I don't know, I had romantic notions of contributing to the world. I thought about joining the Peace Corps, and my dad was like, you know, you could go to Iran. I'm sure you could find, you know, a way to kind of be involved or contribute there as well. So that is what I did. So this is a picture of me with, this is my cousin, sharing a chair together. These are her twin daughters and her husband. One of the things, my book is actually dedicated to Niloufar, my cousin. She was on the airplane. If you guys remember, about a year and a half ago, there were tensions between the US and Iran. And at one point, Iran actually ended up shooting one of its own passenger civilian flights. And she sadly was on that flight with a lot of other people, a lot of Canadians. She had since immigrated to Canada and had been there just visiting her family. So while I was in Iran, let me just check. Among other things, I ended up working, so I was working at the Ministry of Jihad against poverty. So I know jihad often has a different connotation, but it was either the way it could be translated is as reconstruction jihad or jihad against poverty. And the goal of kind of the folks I was working with, we would go into the villages. It was a lot of like economic development projects, economic access projects. So you can see the pictures on the right there are with some of the villagers when we were going and doing different projects. And you know, most of my Iranian family, of course, they weren't necessarily super religious. They weren't. I mean, my father's actually religious. He's more religious than most of his family. But even the ones that were religious were not supporters of the regime. And so it was interesting because my work colleagues, many of them, you know, did identify as kind of supporters of the regime. So it was really interesting conversations. And these were wonderful people, you know, really serving with whole hearts, wanting to kind of move the country forward. So it was really kind of interesting, fascinating conversations for me. Like, what does it mean to support the regime? And, you know, how does one justify kind of some of the uglier aspects of the regime? Or how does one's thinking evolve over time? And I ended up meeting and marrying a man whose family, you know, he had family members who not only supported the regime, but actually really were part of the regime in that they had held senior positions within the government at different times since the revolution. And so that was, again, a whole other set of kind of conversations around, you know, what does that mean? And, you know, some of for me, this is where just in terms of the exposure to some of the more, I mean, often when journalists or others write about Iran, or even if they get to visit or whatever, they're not as embedded or, you know, kind of close to or have those family relationships with folks to really understand. And that was one of the things for me that was exciting about writing the book, was giving folks a chance to kind of hear some of those conversations that they wouldn't otherwise maybe. And then, of course, in addition to, you know, kind of the political aspect, there is this whole family aspect where, you know, on the one hand, you know, there are pieces of it that felt perhaps really different. But, you know, as you get to know people that, you know, seem really different, and then you kind of become a part of the family, it's like, oh, this is just like things were in Salt Lake, or this is just how things were in Washington, D.C. It's really not, you know, there are some superficial differences, but not all that much. Okay, so that was, you know, kind of just my story a little bit to give you a sense of some of the things that I was drawing on in writing the story. But now I want to turn to the 2009 election. And it's funny, you guys kind of mentioned some of the parallels with the US. I mean, the election really was I mean, I was really, you know, I had no idea when I was writing this, you know, it was fascinating this year to have this come out and see some of those interesting parallels. Ahmadinejad on the right, he was, you know, definitely the regime favored candidate. He also happened to be one of these kind of talk off the cuff folks. He would say these outrageous things. He didn't care who he offended. The challenger on the left, Mousavi, was kind of this elder statesman seen as supporting more kind of liberal principles. One of the things that was kind of cool about him was the extent to which his wife, who's also pictured there, Zahra Rahnavard, was involved in the campaign. That's not so typical in Iran. And she also had really kind of a public persona and career of her own. So we were not living in Iran anymore in 2009, but just a few months before the election, we were there to visit. This is me and my kids, my father-in-law, my two sisters-in-law, my mother-in-law. And you could already see, like, I mean, just so much enthusiasm for Mousavi. The campaign had chosen like the color green as its kind of campaign, you know, just color or whatever. So you'd see people just kind of spontaneously gather in the streets, and, you know, the green balloons and the green sashes and green ribbons around, just to show kind of their support. So this was election day. We were back in the States at this point. And just this kind of level of excitement where people were standing in line for hours in the sun. And when you're in the sun with a chador, that's even harder. Like that's not a lot of fun, right? And, there because they wanted to feel that their voice mattered. And one thing that I think is sometimes a misperception in the assumption that in Iran there really is no choice when it comes to presidential elections, and that actually it is true that the regime kind of vets who can run for president. But usually in the past, there has been choice, and there has been a sense of like that vote matters, right? And when Khatami, for example, was elected, that was a surprise. Like that was not the regime favored candidate. So there have been moments where the non-regime favored candidate has won. There was a sense, certainly in this election, that people's voice mattered. So people, really went out in the streets and voted. And so that's why it really was a shock to folks when just a few hours after polls closed, state television announced that Ahmadinejad was the winner. That was way too fast for, it was kind of unprecedented. And it's funny, again, kind of comparing with our elections, the night of the election, we're all like, okay, who won? The next day, okay, who won? The day after that, okay, who won? It's like, oh my God, this is taking forever, and a lot of frustration around that. And in some ways, really, that perhaps is a sign of our institutions working, because people were kind of, slowly checking, moving forward, making sure things were accurate. So the next day, you have this just groundswell of, anger and frustration, and people going out in the streets. And this color of green that had just been like the color of the campaign becomes now the color of protest. And this is where, so the green sash on the cover for my book, it was directly inspired by some of these pictures. And then of course you have the government crackdown, which did not take long. And, some of it was by people who were in uniforms like this. And then you also had the Basijis, who were, plain clothes. You don't always know who they are, and would kind of appear and work in concert with the uniformed police. And Tehran really at this point kind of turned into a battlefield. So that is the context of what was going on in the streets when we come to this wedding. And of course, Sarah and Ali, there's all this tension going on between their families because they have such strong differences about what's going on in the streets. And then, they end up getting kind of directly sucked into what's going on in the streets when they make that fateful decision to let a protester into their car on the way home from their wedding. So this is where I will go ahead and stop. Yeah, and then can answer any questions.
Super interesting. I have a ton of questions, but I will open the floor up to others who might have some questions or thoughts or comments they want to share after your presentation.
I'm curious, one of the things that we started to talk about is how often folks of such such strongly different opinions do come together in marriage. It sounded like from the book there was some arrangement to the marriage, and especially when there might be family involvement in who you decide to marry, how often are the families so different?
Yeah, that is a great question. So one of the things that has been interesting about like the post-revolutionary period altogether or whatever is like you have a group of people. So like my dad and like a bunch of other people that came together and they were united against the Shah, right? And then they get rid of the Shah, and then within themselves, they're like, wait, we don't agree on everything. And then they have issues, right? And so then another group kind of peels off, right? that sort of thing seems like it keeps happening repeatedly. And in the 2009 election, I mean, what happened is like, you have a group of people that they're like, oh yeah, we're the same. Like we're on the same side of this, like, I mean, those two families, Ali's family, Sarah's family, they're both extremely religious, both regime supporters. I mean, even Azar, she's not saying that we shouldn't have an Islamic Republic. She wants to reform the Islamic Republic, right? And take it back to kind of the original ideals that were. So there's this sense of, and she's kind of, she's a little the most extreme within that family too, right? But both of these families are very conservative, so, and have family relationships, so their sense is that they are on the same page. And what happened, and what happened in Iran also with this election, is that this happened and people actually, and for us here, it was really interesting hearing from folks in Iran. And sometimes we were surprised by who was like, this is so awful and unacceptable and horrible and really kind of causing people to lose faith in the regime, and who was actually like, this is clearly like US involvement in this, and this is an attempt to weaken the country, and we really need to stand together. And people are just kind of crying foul because they lost the election and not kind of getting on board. So and Iran has had experience with the US meddling in their elections as well. So I mean, it is probably more common than one might, those families actually felt like they were really similar. And then this kind of brought out the differences between them. Great question.
I've got a question. I'm interested in, I read somewhere, and I don't remember where now, that one of your reasons for writing the book is to sort of convince America not to bomb Iran. And I'm curious, is that like a true statement? And then also, I'd love for you to dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely correct. I mean, I'm sure, I bridge a few different worlds, right? Like I have, a lot of Mormons in my family. I've got a lot of Muslims in my family. I've been in Iran, and then in Iran, I've spent time with kind of super religious people and kind of less conservative people or whatever. And I'm sure all of you also bridge different worlds. If you think about like, just in your lives, in your families, kind of different groups of folks or whatever. And when you bridge different worlds and but those folks don't really connect with each other very often. You see kind of the misperceptions that people have about each other, right? And so one of the roles of people who are kind of in the middle is kind of, helping people like humanize and get to know one another, right? And it's particularly scary when one of those groups, like their misperceptions are at such a heightened level that, for example, they do talk about things like very cavalier, like bomb, 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 Iran. I don't know if you guys remember when John McCain was, or kind of as if there aren't like actual people there, or people who don't understand, who just kind of take an entire country and decide that they're our enemy without understanding like the people that are on the front lines that are actually fighting, what are we risking over here, right? They're over there risking their lives to try to like hold their government accountable. There was definitely a part of this where I wanted people to get to know, and that's part of why I talked about kind of the most conservative elements too. Like if you can find some kind of, the folks that are the most demonized in some ways. And it's not that I am, I wanted to take kind of the strongest argument of the conservative side and still take it apart. I didn't want to create a straw man, right? Like, oh, it's so easy to see because they're all like sexist, jerks who, want to oppress women and, just don't believe in democracy and they hate us for the way we live our lives or whatever. Like I wanted to take like the best form of that, of why someone would like support the regime. And still I criticize, like I take that apart. But I think first having the best form of that argument and taking it apart, number one, it like humanizes the other side. And secondly, then it's like our argument is stronger for why that's wrong, so those are some of the things that went into that.
Oh, very, very interesting.
Yeah. I have questions for you guys too, I know not everybody was able to get through the whole book, but anyway, I'm happy to answer, but I always love hearing from folks like who was their favorite character, or who like just drove them like up the wall, or, you know, what things they felt like, you know, really resonated or just seemed like, no, that would never happen or whatever.
I don't know if Ashley is still on. I know she's actually at work and was taking a break to kind of jump on, but we did talk a little bit about her favorite character. She might have had to jump back and get back to her duties, but she did say I think she may, but I think she said that Azar, how do I pray? Is it Azar or Oz?
It's Azar. It's like
was her favorite character. And we did start talking a little bit about just her character being a little bit of I don't quite want to say an anomaly, because I don't think it's probably that strong of a term, but just her career in helping women to get out of, you know, sort of oppressive marriages, and some of her tactics were just more, I guess, brazen and courageous than some of the other folks were taking. So that we talked a little bit about how fun that was.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of favorite character for me. Azar she was definitely probably one of the favorite ones. I also thought Mary, how do I say that? Is that how I say that? I liked her because I don't know, I feel like she reminded me of people that I know, right? Like I feel like there are some matriarchs of the family who sort of take on that role and they run with it, right? They're just like, this is my show to run. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. I'm going to, you know, I have all the answers. So I really liked her in that. I felt like you did a really good job of humanizing her. And she had her flaws, but like all good characters do, right? Like if she was perfect, then, you know, it wouldn't really matter. But it was funny to see how her meddling sometimes just, you know, got things really, really bad for other folks. So I did think she was, I did think she was a really, really kind of cool character as well. So. I don't know if the other folks had any thoughts on kind of different characters. It
looks like Ashley commented in the chat that she's still able to listen, but she had to turn her camera off and stuff. So,
oh, thank you.
I'm curious about. I ask lots of authors this, like, if you feel like your characters reflect people from your family or an amalgamation of people that you know, or if you felt like you had to pull characters together to tell the story that you wanted to tell.
Yeah. So each of the characters, like my three main characters, were a combination of both like kind of people that I either kind of knew or knew of, or, you know, like, and just like symbolic of kind of a group of folks as well, you know? So for me, Sarah was kind of symbolic of folks who are, I mean, you know, there's that youth, right, where you just don't know, you know, and ideally we have a society where it's okay for a young person to just be kind of focused on her wedding and like, you know, the stuff she wants to buy and blah, 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 right? But then at what point does that kind of innocence, which maybe we want to preserve, actually become a sort of complicity where the system is kind of working for her and her life, and she kind of wants to close her eyes to how that impacts other people and doesn't want to allow that to kind of disrupt the comfort of her life. So that was something that I was kind of playing with, those themes with her. Sadr, you know, of course, was kind of the, you know, super strong believer who really, really, you know, wants to do what's right. And then what he's put his faith in these religious institutions. And then suddenly that comes into conflict with his own sense of what's right and wrong. And then he has to make a decision. How do I decide what's right? Do I trust myself, or do I trust the people who've been telling me what's right and wrong all my life? And that for me, you know, felt very realistic and not just, and I would say for a lot of these characters, not just on the Muslim side, but on the Mormon side as well, like, you know, family members where you're kind of following a particular belief. And then what do you do? What do we all do when the people we've put our faith in are then telling us to do something that kind of doesn't feel right? And then Azar was really fun, you know, she, for me was, you know, really representative of a lot of the brave men and women who were out there in the streets and risking so much. And then for her, there were kind of two things that I was playing with. One was, you know, how kind of a mother, or how do you, on the one hand, you're fighting for a future, a free future for your children, right? And then on the other hand, are you sacrificing there today? You're having to decide, like, in my fight for justice, how do I, what am I sacrificing, and what's worth sacrificing? The other thing I played with a little bit with Azar was, I don't know if it's kind of a subtle thing, but, she's so committed to women's rights. She's so committed to democratic values, but then she doesn't actually treat Ms. Tabby Beyond very well. She's got this kind of elitist like sense that, she's from a lower class family. She's from and so, I kind of was playing a little bit with, in different social justice. And I think we're moving away from this. I think in the past, where I think social justice movements are kind of coming together and supporting one another and learning more about one another's struggles. But I think there have certainly been moments where, if you think about like the women's rights movement or the gay rights movement, or like whatever kind of specific issue it is, where you're so clear about what's wrong about my issue, but not aware of your own like internal classism or racism or whatever it is, you know what I mean? And so I felt like with Azar, she's so clear about the need for democracy, but is she also clear about the fact that she's kind of an elitist snob and really mean to this poor woman, Beyond, so our own kind of, so it's definitely a combination of like themes that I was really interested in looking at. And then also just like kind of representative of people that, felt realistic to me.
So let me ask, am I saying her name right? Murray, Mehri?
Mehri, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mehri, sorry about that.
Yeah, no, you're good.
Yes, I noticed she's the matriarch of the family, but also she has two daughters that she confines in. Is that right? Mary, Zainab?
Zainab,
Zainab. And there's another one. Is it Fatima? Did I say that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, perfect.
Those are the two that she's pretty close to. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, she's definitely closer to Zainab than she is to Fatima. Zainab's kind of her confidant, and she doesn't necessarily think that highly of Fatima.
Sorry, my sound went out.
Can you hear us okay? Oh, I think she's
Yeah, froze. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I froze for a second. So, I found it very interesting, though, that she's the matriarch of the family, and she also had two daughters that she kind of confided in. I kind of like that relationship that they had.
Yeah. One of the things that is interesting, and I'd be curious to hear from you guys what you thought about this, is one of those themes that I didn't even realize I was putting in the book, and then readers, as they've asked, like, oh, wow, I actually wrote about, is motherhood, right? And that was not intentional, but clearly it's just kind of, as someone who is a mother, or, that was, it's part of my life or whatever. But the question of who is a good mother, which of these characters, you've got Azar, you've got Mama Mehri, you've got Somaya, Sadr's wife, you've got Ms. Tabby Beyond, and they're all making choices that impact the young people in their lives in different ways. So I don't know if that's something that stood out for you, but I'm always curious to hear who do you think was a good mother in this book?
Well, I did not get to read all of it, but I didn't know about Azar because it appeared she had some kids that she could not quite control. I'm just
Yeah, that was her trying to control her kids. That was hilarious. And I don't know if that was like an intentional thing, but I was like, man, these kids, I have definitely been there where you're like, oh my gosh, please stop. Like, just be normal for 2 seconds. No, but it's interesting that you said that wasn't an intention of yours to talk about kind of the theme of motherhood, is because I noticed it like throughout. I mean, it was with Mr. Bibi and her daughter just trying to do what was right for her, and obviously Azar, and with Sarah and Ali having a child. Like, I just felt like there, even when the decisions that they made, I thought, man, does that really make sense under the circumstances? Like, as you kind of think back, like their goal is to do the best that they can by their children. And I think as a mother, we all struggle with that, right? I think we all sort of say, okay, someone looking on the outside might say this isn't the best decision, but based upon what I have here and the other choices that I have, here's the best thing that I can do in the moment for my child or children. So it was funny because I did find that all the different mothers in the book went about motherhood a little bit differently, and sometimes had to make hard decisions that folks may or may not agree with. But I think at the end of the day, you have to do the best that you can, and pray.
Yeah, right.
That's it. So there's another thing that I found very interesting, and I know I'm one of the ones that did not get to finish the book, but I like how you characterize how marriage takes place, because that's totally different for me. That's a totally different culture. So I appreciate the education of that.
Mm-hmm. And Ashley also said she liked how Samaya was such a glue to her family, and really enjoyed when she got Saded's perspective on how and how he saw her as a wife and a mother. I agree with that. I thought that, and I don't know how much of that was intentional, but I really liked the dynamic between the two of them. I really felt like, I don't know, I sort of felt like he gave a lot more deference to her than some of the other sort of male-female relationships in the book. And I don't know, I really liked it. I just really, that I think endeared me to him so much more, because I felt like he really was concerned about what she thought, and really treated her as sort of a partner and less of a, well, I'm the man and I get to make the decisions, or I say, how things are supposed to be, or whatever else. So I really did like that dynamic as well. It was same thing as Ashley said.
Yeah. Yeah, there were some fun. Oh, no, go ahead, Kendra. Oh, you're on mute. How
did that even happen? It must have recognized I was talking and muted me, so I was saying things stupid. I think about relationships a lot, especially kind of in storytelling, and thinking about kind of the expectations of and responsibilities we have based on our, like, if we're the mom or if we're the kid or whatever, and what the decisions we make would look and feel like differently if we were the cousin or the friend, because the responsibilities related to those relationships are can have such a play on whether or not we think we should or shouldn't, make certain choices. But I also am interested in a theme that you mentioned related to, I can't remember which character, but at the end, the little boy loses his ear, and one of the said was, working so hard for a free future, and what are the sacrifices that we have to make today? And, does it feel to him like she's working towards a bigger goal when he has to have surgery on his ear now? Like those are those long-term decisions we make for, even just thinking about, civil unrest, losing your job, or all of those things that you have to do now in order to think about this long-term sort of like goal that's bigger than us, which I think is so interesting from a sort of relationship consideration perspective. And that's what did me, because that was a rambling mess of words, but.
Oh no, that resonates so much for me. So I spent a number of years working on Palestinian human rights campaigns. So those kinds of decisions, or even like over the summer or whatever, in this country where you're making a decision to go, because so often the price of it's invisible in some ways. You don't see like the way that it kind of ties you up in knots, and the additional stress, like that in addition to like everything else going on in just a regular life, now you're going to go out and like stand in front of your field, in front of a bulldozer that's coming, or now you're going to go stand in front of like police officers to like make a statement or whatever, like the additional stress and every decision that has to be made, and how much out of my life can I put into this? And I know it's important for us to stand up for this, and yet, there are real consequences for my health, for, my ability to be there for my kids, to be like a calm, present, mother or whatever. And those are real like communities that are oppressed and are facing those are big decisions that, and I feel like for these things, there's no right answer necessarily for, that's part of, the exploration is, I mean, different families are going to kind of answer that in different ways. And there can be nobility in all ways of kind of handling those situations. So anyway, it's been interesting, the reaction to Azar in different, like I feel almost geographically, like I had a book club of folks that were from kind of, I guess, like Southern Georgia area or whatever. And they just could not get over how badly her children behaved. That just felt to them like, so like, why does she just not like smack them or get them? And like, it just was, that wasn't like that, like they couldn't, it made it harder for them to really like her because they felt like she had to just get that together and it shouldn't be so hard. And then I talked to another group of women who were kind of more like, I don't know, California, like professional, like, and it really bothered them that I was kind of making, the one woman who like has a career, like I'm making her look bad, like her kids, like a career woman can't have kids that are well behaved or something. Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting hearing like different folks based on, and then, another group that was based in Salt Lake that kind of felt like really, they felt like as mothers, their primary job was to like, make sure their kids were okay. And then their kids would go out and change the world kind of thing, as opposed to directly, so it's just, I mean, there's a bit of like, maybe, as we kind of, our own kind of growth experiences kind of impacts how we kind of see the different characters or whatever. And it's been fun for me to kind of see that in some of the different book clubs I've been doing.
Yeah, that's interesting. One other question I had was, one of my favorite parts of the book was, I felt like I learned so much, right? Like I felt like it was an entertaining story, but it also highlighted my ignorance to like so many things. Like as I'm thinking back to like the Green Wave movement and all that, I'm like, well, I remember, but like I didn't appreciate it, and I didn't realize some of the details of it. So I thought that was really cool. One of the other things, and one of the ways in which you did that was like pulling on some of the like customs, like some of the things like so there was like Farsi in there and that was sort of mixed in. And I thought that was cool as well. Some of the things like, and I don't remember which character this was, but you highlighted the idea that the wife shouldn't sit with her back to the husband.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, if I'm getting that correctly. And I thought like, man, like some of these things it just never like occurred to me, and how Sadek's mother, Miss Mary, he wasn't able to see her without being covered. Yeah. And some of these things were so interesting to me because I never really considered them, and how they may impact, right, certain relationships or certain ways in which you move within the world. And so I'm curious as to the way you weave those in there. They're kind of like these little nuggets, right? Like you could almost skip over them, right? But if you really paid attention, you're like, oh, well, I think she's trying to like tell us something we may or may not know. So I'm curious if that was sort of your intention, and if so, what kind of drove you to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wanted to kind of paint a picture and give folks as much of a sense as possible of kind of like being in the room and, having that flavor. I'm glad to hear that you liked the Farsi. That was a really kind of tough decision, like how to and what was tricky is like when I was hearing the dialogue, I'm hearing it in Farsi, right? And then I'm translating into English. But then like there are places where I just really want to, and then how do I do the Farsi? But then also, and so what I ended up doing, because I didn't want to have like, a subscript or whatever. So what I ended up doing is I would do Farsi, but then right after it, I'd pretty much say the same thing in English, or I'd do like some sort of context type thing. And some of my Farsi readers, actually, it kind of annoyed them because they felt like it was like repetitive, like you're reading it in Farsi and then in English or whatever. Anyway, and then, yeah, in terms of kind of, one of the things that a lot of folks have said that they also enjoyed was just like, okay, what's a house chador versus an outdoor chador, like all the different little details or whatever. And, some of those were things that for me, I was also learning. So, when, they stood out for me as something that, I was interested in sharing, and just kind of giving people a flavor for, Maman Mehri. I mean, her jam is just that she's so like over the top religious that she's doing things that like, normal Muslims, like, you know, you adopt someone, they come into your home, you raise them, like, you're not going to make this a big deal. But she's like, you know, letter of the law, like, I got to make sure that I'm, you know, like, and I think that kind of stems from her own guilty conscience as well, of, you know, some of the things that she's done, you know, and she really loves Sadr. Like, she wants, you know, and she knows, like, what she's done to have him in his life was not right. And so that's kind of a way of like a penance for that almost, I think. So yeah, just all those different little things were really fun to weave in. Some of my, you know, and just even like some of the minor characters for me, like, I don't know, Layla's neighbor, the little nosy like neighbor who's like getting her nose in there, and then she wants, you know, money for, like, you know, like she's looking for, I mean, just those were sometimes really fun, you know, characters just to kind of throw in there as, you know, little and kind of, I think, is another little flavor as well. Who did you guys think was like the bad person in the story, or that you just like hated or thought was kind of evil or whatever?
I can't answer that because I didn't finish my book all the way.
I mean, I think the obvious one is Haydari.
Yeah.
And I think you spoke about this a little bit, but you know, I kind of think of him as like the torturer, the bad guy. And you talked about sort of having folks who weren't quite on that spectrum, but I think for me, he was kind of the clear, okay, he's a bad guy. I don't see any redeeming qualities about him that would make it sort of like, well, I can understand this. I think he was certainly the clear bad guy, but I think for all the other characters, I think I didn't think of any of the other ones as really bad characters, right? I thought they were in tough situations. I thought they had difficult decisions to make. Maybe I agreed with them, maybe I didn't, but I didn't think any of them is really bad. So I'm curious if your goal was to have sort of Haydari like be the torturer, the really clear bad guy, so that other folks, you know, you kind of maybe looked at them a little more deeply. I'm curious as to if that was your intent.
Yeah, I will share, and I'm curious just to hear, I don't know, Cole, Kendra, Kenya, if you guys had any thoughts about who the bad guys were, or Ashley, I know you're kind of listening in. No pressure if you don't have any additional thoughts, just curious.
Well, I completely agree with what Antoinette said.
Yeah.
I always think about, and I also did not finish the book, think about this idea of the villain, and I've been accused of being a villain sympathizer, because from the perspective of the bad guy, they're not the bad guy, you know what I mean? And so I always feel like there's always this story that I don't know about them. And what we were just talking about is this idea that you have to make hard decisions that really suck to move a movement forward. And it looks really bad right now. And like one day he might repent or whatever for torturing a 10-year-old. Moment, he probably sees himself as somebody who's willing to do the hard thing. And so like, yes, he's the bad guy. And probably if we were hearing the story from his perspective, Azar is the bad guy. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I want Kenya to be my attorney if I ever need him.
Well, I love that, like, that kind of perspective and openness. And like, I think in our world today, we're so quick to kind of just trying to figure out who the good and the bad guys are and not have much sympathy for people that we think are on the other side of that. In the writing, Antoinette, you and Ashley, I think the way that you guys, that is really how I thought of it too. Like there was really one character that in my mind kind of, like you said, had no redeeming qualities. Like Haydari for me was, and the thing is, I don't meet many people like that in my life, right? Like most, and so, but for this story, I did, I kind of put every kind of horrible thing, and I thought of him as kind of someone who was really kind of a sadist actually. And he was able to find his way into a system and that would not hold him accountable because it found him useful in some ways for some other purposes. Wow. Every other character in the book really did have nuance in terms of what it was, and even folks that were defending someone like Haydari, like Samaya defends kind of that whole system. Mon Mehri would defend, that system. There was more nuance to why they did so and kind of their understanding. yeah, so it's interesting. Some people have felt like Maman Mehri was a big villain in the story, and they really couldn't forgive her for what she did to Miss Tabibian, and kind of saw her as just really, really selfish and, you know, unkind and horrible. Some people have had a lot of trouble with Somaya because they felt like she just was so like sure of herself and bossy and, you know, kind of ruling, you know, like a little Maman Mehri maybe in training or whatever. So it's just interesting to hear kind of the folks that, you know, different people kind of gravitate towards as seeing as the villain or whatever.
Can you talk a little bit about, I know we're kind of running out of time, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit about when I got to the part of the book that where I understood why it was called A Door Between Us. I was like,
Yeah.
Because I kept like waiting, like I was like, there's gonna be some small detail I'm gonna miss, and then I'm not gonna realize why the book is called that. So I'd be curious if you could talk a little bit about the sort of title of the book and how you came to, you know, sort of how you came to it, basically.
Yeah. I mean, so it comes from a Rumi poem that, if I'm quoting correctly, is something like, "Why struggle to open a door between us when the wall itself is an illusion?" And it really, for me, kind of spoke to so many aspects, both of the book and what I was trying to do, which is, you know, you have this sense so often that you're so different from people who are on the other side. Kenya, kind of like what you're talking about in terms of being able to empathize with or sympathize with the villain or whatever. And for me, you know, this piece of kind of like in the story, you've got characters who are struggling to kind of relate to and understand one another, and then, you know, finding the common threads, but then also this kind of bigger meta project for me around the US and Iran. And really, I mean, you know, for me, like one of the things that was fun was taking kind of, you know, like Somaya, her whole thing where she's kind of defending this system or whatever, like literally, I think that came from the mouths of some of my Mormon relatives, like taking like, you know, exact kind of phrasing and, you know, defense of different things. And then, you know, I mean, like just that kind of this sense of how, and yet those relatives and my Muslim relatives or whatever would never say that they're anything like each other, right? Wouldn't necessarily see that. And yet so many of the kind of arguments they're using or ways that they're seeing the world or whatever, including kind of then when some of them go off and become a Sadiq, where they're really questioning or whatever. And these experiences, like these are not things that I've only seen this, you know, for me. So it was kind of, for me, it felt like a really great title for what was going on in the book, but then also kind of this larger project. For me. Yeah.
I love that. I mean, I think that so often there's this us versus them mentality, whatever situation you're talking about, right? It's like, well, I'm over here on the right side. I know what the right thing to do is. And those people over there just can't get it. I need to show them what the right way is. And I love the concept of sort of highlighting the similarities. And I left saying this Iranian family, I see so much of my family in it. So much of the different characters' experiences I've had myself, right?
Yeah.
Like, yes, you're right. There's some details that are a little bit different where, you know, but like, I can empathize with them, right? They feel like real people, like it feels like real situations. And so that was, I thought that was very, very cool. Particularly, like I said, I think is we, coming up off the most recent election. And I think just all the different things that are happening around us, whether it's you wear a mask or you don't wear a mask, you get vaccinated,
Yes.
like all the things that I think we see a division where it really shouldn't be. It really just is, there's so many things about us that we can draw upon that are similar, as opposed to sort of focusing on those kind of different, those differences that we have. So I thought that was really, really very timely. So you must have been able to see the future.
I'll also just add a jerk of a perspective in there. I don't mind being a villain myself sometimes. That have compassion for someone and still feel like they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we can I can appreciate that people didn't want to wear a mask.
Yeah.
And I can still know that you need to put your mask on. You know, and so I think that those are the pieces too. Like there's a lot of, and I think this comes from sort of like a lot of sort of discourse where it's like everybody should be at the table, suggests that everybody's point of view has the same weight. And I don't always believe that to be the case. Like there are times when there are larger values than your not wearing a mask.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Yeah, I think that's really beautifully put. And that's, that was what I struggled with actually in this story, where I was kind of giving sympathetic treatment. I mean, because we can all agree like, hey, Daddy's a bad guy, right? But for a lot of Iranians who have been jailed and, it is triggering to see somebody like Sadr or Mr. Ganjian, people who were involved with that kind of having such a sympathetic treatment. And what my hope is that I'm doing kind of exactly what you said so well, which is to kind of, treat this character and this, like have empathy and yet also be clear about kind of at the end of the day, what's right and wrong and why do I think it's right and wrong. Yeah.
What would be your takeaway? Like what would you like folks to come away with in reading this? And it sounds like there's folks that are sort of from Iranian descent that might view things differently depending upon their experiences. And then there's sort of folks who may, like most of us, it sounds like on the call, who may not have as much experience in this area and it's sort of new to them. What would be kind of your goal after having read this book for your reader to take away?
Yeah, I mean, I would love for folks to walk away feeling a couple things. Wow, like I did not know this kind of group of people at all. And I learned something about these folks. And there are, things that feel really familiar to me. Like, like my family's kind of like that in some ways. And also like, I've learned something and I feel more invested in kind of knowing like what's going on in Iran today. And like, if someone is like, I'm gonna dig a little deeper to kind of understand like what the story is compared to kind of what's being presented to me like in the news or whatever. So that for me would be, and I also just hope people walk away just kind of enjoying the story and the characters and kind of thinking on them a little bit every once in a while. So that for me would be a huge win.
So I do have one question. Yeah. I appreciate the characters and explaining who they were because there were quite a few characters. Was that your idea, or did you feel, let me just help the readers along the way to understand or know who the characters are? Because I did refer back to the characters quite a bit.
Oh, at the list at the beginning?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that was partly, I had a bunch of kind of beta readers reading as well. And I realized it would be helpful for folks. I mean, I know for myself, when I'm reading a book, I'm also like, I struggle. And then it's like names that are different. And I also worried because like, my first chapter, okay, here is my suggestion to all aspiring writers. Do not start a book at a wedding because there are so many characters and they're all there, right? And then before you really even get to understand and, connect with one character, you're on to the next. And I was really worried, like, are people going to have trouble, like, remembering who's who and how they connect to each other? So that's why I wanted to include that list of characters just to kind of help folks out.
I definitely appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Are there any other questions before we adjourn for the day?
I think we should take a picture for our social needs.
Oh yeah, that would be awesome.
That would be great.
Does everybody have their book? Because I can grab mine if we want to take it.
Can I grab mine too? I'm an author. Let me grab mine.
I ran back up here so that I can
Oh, Ashley,
I was going to call your name.
I just wanted to like make a quick like statement. Like I just thought it was really nice because I think it will help some people who don't have any insight to it at all just see that things aren't black and white, and what one person represents a whole culture as isn't what that culture or community is. So
awesome. Yeah. Awesome. You're right.
Thank you so much. Yay. Oh, this makes me so happy to see you all with the book. Is it tacky for me to do it too?
No, do it.
Okay, all right.
So who knows how to take, because I'm on my Mac, which is new for me. So I'm afraid if I try to like take a screenshot, I'm going to literally shut down the meeting.
I can probably do a screenshot. Can I take one with my phone first? Because it's easy for me to post it.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, let me make sure that I've got a good shot. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then I think I'm gonna try and do it. If I If I shut down, I'll see you guys next month. Okay. I think I got it. Okay, and then I will send it to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Ehsaneh, thank you so much for
Oh, of course. This has been
this has been
so much
really
fun.
And listen,
Yeah.
to people that say covers don't sell books, that is such a lie. I saw
It
this
is such a
cover
lie.
and I was like, okay, I gotta look because whatever is behind
Yeah.
here, I think it might be something. Like this is just like, I don't know, it's beautiful. It's absolutely
Y'all, can we do the picture one more time? Because it's in the picture.
sure. Absolutely. Thank you, Kenya.
1, 2, 3. Okay.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, the graphic artist who did the cover, it's funny because I had like a totally different concept for how we should do the cover. And she totally humored me and like mocked that up. And then she also did this. And it was just so obvious that I was like, oh my God, like she just was a total professional and knew what she was doing. So listen, it sounds like, you guys are on social media. I am too, although I've like kind of been on hiatus the last couple months, but I'm going to hop back on. So I love being in touch with folks. So feel free to connect. And if you have time, one thing that is wonderful, I'm trying to get to 100 reviews on Amazon. So if you have time to do, I think I'm at 98. So if anyone wants to tip me over, that would be awesome.
Okay, I'll take care of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks again. This was very, very fun. I appreciate everybody's time this afternoon.
Yeah, super fun. And congratulations again. Really excited about all you're doing, Antoinette.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you and get your insight on the book.
This was fun. All right, guys. See you later. Thank you.
Guys.
Bye. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.